Let's begin by defining participant observation. It's a qualitative research method where the researcher participates in the events under study while observing them. So that means that the researcher is present at the same location as his research participants are, and it's usually the same physical location. Sometimes, now that we have virtual realities on the internet, this can be also a virtual location. And to a greater or lesser extent, this person, the researcher, is taking part in what the participants are doing, the people that he is observing. So, for example, this movie called Kitchen Stories is based on a true story from the 1950s when where a Swedish market research company wanted to understand how single men living in Norway used their kitchens. So they basically wanted to see what products they used and consequently what types of utilities and appliances they could market to these men. So what they did is they sent out researchers, and you can see the researchers sitting here, equipped with their own trailers so that they had a place to stay outside of the homes of the people that they were observing, and these really wacky looking high chairs where they would sit most of the day for a number of days and just watch these participants, these men, in this case this is the person being observed, and basically took notes on everything that these people did in the kitchen. So this is an example where the researcher is not really taking a very active part in the events of the day that he is observing, but he's still present in the room. And by doing so, he becomes, to some extent, a participant in the events. Another example of the participant observation setting that I'm talking about is attending meetings. A lot of researchers who do participant observation do so by observing groups of people interacting at a meeting, sometimes also becoming active participants and raising their hand and contributing during meetings themselves. So you can be fairly engaged or disengaged. And in fact, the degree of engagement that you have will be discussed a little later in a separate segment of this class. Here's another example of how participant observation could be carried out. Here, the researcher is shadowing the work of two medical professionals as they are preparing a patient for some procedure. You can see clearly that she is not doing anything to the patient, but yet she's standing in the room watching these people do their work. And so by virtue of just being there, she becomes, to some extent, a participant in this event. And this type of participant observation is called shadowing, and it's frequently used, for instance, by interns and new employees who are just starting their work in an organization. On the other hand, it's also frequently used by researchers who want to understand the workings of some institution, and they follow the employees of that institution, for example. Now, the people that we observe are called the natives. This term comes from the earliest anthropological research where participant observation techniques were first used, and travelers and explorers went to remote locations and met native tribes there in different, what is now different countries of the world. And they stayed with them and they observed their lives to get to know them and to get to know their ways of living. And so because those people were called the natives, today when we conduct participant observation, we call the people we are watching the natives, also because we watch them in sort of their natural environment. So we typically observe people either at work or at home or in some public settings, but either way, it's always in their natural environment. We don't take these people out of their natural environment. We don't put them in a lab, but we do so in places where people normally function. And that's why participant observation research is also called field research, because we go out of our laboratory, our research lab, our office, and we go out into the field, into people's natural environments. And participant observation is particularly useful for observing a couple things. First of all, any kind of phenomenon that is best observed in its natural setting, and that would be very, very difficult to observe in a laboratory, for instance. So if you think of situations like first dates or friends having conversations at a dinner, it will probably be much easier to just go into a restaurant and observe people there than have those same people brought into your research lab and giving them a dinner in the lab and having them have the same type of interaction. It would probably become very artificial. And if we're talking about first dates and the behavior at first dates, that is even more tricky to recreate in an artificial environment. So anything that is best observed in its natural setting, where the setting itself is important for information that you find, that is a good candidate for participant observation. Also, if we want to see how processes, different things develop over time, well, it really takes some time. We're talking maybe weeks or months or even years for things to change and develop. Participant observation is probably the most practical method. For example, if I wanted to understand how a newly created company develops a culture, because every company has a culture, a way of communicating, a set of rules, a set of informal rules and customs, some sort of atmosphere that is really difficult to grasp and it's not written down anywhere, but it's unique to this company. And it doesn't happen overnight. The culture develops over time, and so also as new people join the company, the culture may be slightly modified. The leaders are particularly influential in creating that culture. So in order to get a really good grasp of how a company culture develops and changes over time and what factors contribute to those changes, participant observation is a really, really good tool, and you would probably want to spend a fair amount of time over an extended period of time observing people's behaviors and observing communication at that company or at that organization. Another example, a really interesting thing to observe is how children's relationships with their parents change over time as the kids grow up. When we are very little, our relationship to the parent is very different from when we are 20 years old. We go from being totally dependent on the parent to totally independent on the parent, and then as our parents age, they may become dependent on us. And that also contributes to the way we communicate with our parents. So if you wanted to understand how these things change over time, then participant observation may be a good one. You might be able to observe your own family, or you might be able to observe other people's families over a period of a few years, and that might give you an insight of how this process happened over time.